Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Tyrell Gittins, and as we have already established, I am one of the co-founders and current steering committee members of the GYBN chapter. Thank you so much for joining the fifth session of our Youth Diplomacy Development course. We are going to begin swiftly this afternoon. So before I introduce our presenter for this afternoon, just a reminder that the chat function has been disabled, so you can utilize the Q&A box, which will be at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device, to answer any questions. The mic and video functions have also been disabled, so if there are any moments that our presenter will need you to respond, the team will unmute individuals accordingly. I would like to present our presenter for this afternoon. Mr. Jeremiah Edmond is an environmental planning and sustainable development professional with over 15 years of experience in biodiversity management, environmental policy, forestry, agriculture, and project development in St. Lucia. He holds MSc degrees in environmental science and agriculture and currently serves as a technical advisor, regional biodiversity with the GIZ project, and he has led biodiversity and biosafety initiatives and international negotiations under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Mr. Edmond has extensive experience in environmental reporting, ecosystem management, stakeholder coordination, and project proposal development. He is skilled in GIS, data analysis, and environmental communication with a strong commitment to sustainable resource management and regional development. So, Mr. Edmond, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon. As Tyrell mentioned, my name is Jeremiah Edmond, and it's a pleasure to be here to impart some of my knowledge and experience with you. I think this is a great initiative that the GBYN Caribbean chapter has started. I think it's something that is well appreciated and well needed to ensure that we have a young crop of potential Caribbean ambassadors and future negotiators in the biodiversity space. So without further ado, I will go into my presentation. So I'm going to mute my camera. Hold on a second. I'm going to mute my camera for bandwidth purposes in case I get cut off. So let me just go back to my presentation. And we go to presentation mode. So, like Tyrell mentioned, I am from St. Lucia. I have been working in St. Lucia in the environmental space for quite some time, and I've been in the last 4 or 5 years the lead negotiator to the Convention on Biological Diversity for St. Lucia. At present, I am a technical advisor on a regional project which is being implemented jointly by CARICOM and GIZ. And this project aims to harmonize the approaches to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity within the Caribbean region, and as well as looking at national ecosystem assessments and using the outcomes of that in decision making, and strengthening the access and benefit sharing frameworks for islands for select CARICOM countries within the region. I also serve as one of the bureau representatives for the COP17 Bureau. I am one of the representatives from the group of Latin America and the Caribbean, GULAC, along with Jamaica and from the Caribbean. So we make up the two representatives from the Caribbean on the CBD COP17 Bureau. So today my presentation is entitled Building the Next Generation of Biodiversity Negotiators. There is always a need for a new crop of enthusiastic, brilliant, energetic negotiators that are willing to put in the hard work and the dedication that comes with being a negotiator. I think in your last session, Ms. Chesney gave her experiences of a COP, and you may remember that it's not an easy process. It's a very tiring, and a lot of effort and energy needs to go into it. You need to be focused so that you can contribute effectively to the negotiations that are ongoing. So my presentation has five main areas. Firstly, I'll give a brief introduction on the Convention on Biological Diversity, the roles of the national focal points, to the CB national focal points. We're going to look at also how national consultations inform regional and global negotiations. What happens at a national level? How does that feed into these regional and global processes? Entry points for youth engagement in national biodiversity processes. And finally, pathways towards mentorship with regional negotiators. So I think many of you may have some idea of what the convention is, but I'll just go into it briefly. So the Convention on Biological Diversity, it was signed on the 5th of June and it came into force on the 29th, 5th of June 1992 and came into force in December 1993. The whole idea of the convention came about from one of the outputs of the Earth Summit in Rio in 2002, where globally it was recognized that we were facing some significant development challenges and action needed to be taken to address the challenges, both economic, environmental, and social. So that's where the CBD was born, as well as the UNFCCC. There are 196 parties are now countries are now party to this convention. I think the only country globally who is not a party to the CBD is the United States. The convention has three main objectives. First one being conservation of biological diversity. Second one being the sustainable use of biodiversity. And the third objective is access and benefit sharing from the utilization of genetic resources. So share the benefits that are derived from the utilization of these genetic resources. So over the years, it was realized that these three objectives are very broad and they were emerging issues that needed attention that couldn't really be covered under the current text of the convention. So what happened? Some new protocols were developed and adopted by the parties of the convention. So first, it was the Cartagena Protocol, and the Cartagena Protocol, it's another international agreement which aims to ensure that there's safe handling, transport, and use of living modified organisms, LMOs. A lot of times, persons use the synonym as GMOs, genetically modified organisms, but the LMOs goes into more detail, and these result from modern biotechnology that may have adverse effects on biodiversity as well as human health. So these issues were really emerging with the advancement in biotechnology, and a new international agreement had to be developed and put in place to ensure that this will be managed. And this is where the Cartagena Protocol comes in. It was adopted in January 2000, and it came into force 11 September 2003. And currently, there are 173 parties to this protocol, meaning that countries have signed and ratified. Ratification meaning that they have confirmed legal agreement that they will adhere to the text and rules of the convention or of the protocol or the treaty. That's what ratification essentially means. Another protocol was developed in Nagoya in 2010, and that was the Nagoya Protocol. And Nagoya Protocol, and it was developed to deal with the third objective of the convention, access and benefit sharing. So this protocol on access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization is a supplementary agreement to the CBD. It provides a transparent legal framework for the effective implementation of the third objective, the fair and equitable sharing of the utilization of these resources. Under this protocol as well, it also takes into account not just the genetic resource, but it also considers the traditional knowledge that is associated to these genetic resources. So, for example, if it is known that a particular plant has a particular property and that knowledge resides within a particular community or a particular indigenous community or a local community, then the protocol makes provisions to ensure that if that knowledge is used, these benefits should be shared with the holders of that information. This one was adopted in 29th October in 2010, and it came into force on 12th October 2014. This is the newest protocol, and it all has 142 ratifications. So within the negotiation space and within the context of these international treaties, there's something that they call national focal points. So I'll pose the question now. Does anyone know what a national focal point is? And Tyrell, you can help me with responses to see if anyone types in the chat or because I can't see the Q&A screen with my screen on presentation mode. So does anyone know what a national focal point is? Or is anyone in this room a national focal point? Any answers in the Q&A? I see we have no answers. Okay, I see someone was typing. National, it would be an EPA Guyana, yes, and the other focal points. Yes, Guyana is EPA. Someone is renewable energy. A national focal point is the National Office or Center, making suggestions for biodiversity conservation. For the most part, yes. So the EPA is the national focal point in Guyana for the Convention on Biological Diversity. A focal point could be a center, an individual, but in the context, a focal point is really is a personal institution designated by a government to represent that party between meetings of the convention of the parties in this routine dealings with the secretariat in matters involving the convention. So, yes, a mouthful. So, a focal point can either be an individual or an organization. So, the EPA is the focal point in Guyana for the convention, and they are responsible for representing the interests of Guyana to the convention. So all communications and interactions with the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity would have to go through that focal point. In some instances, it's an individual where you have an individual at a focal point who does that, or in some instances, it's an agency. So, what do these agencies really do? What do these focal points really do? So, there are quite a number of functions that focal points would normally do. Again, I pose a question, does anyone know some of the functions of the focal point? So let's check the chat, see what would come up. Function of a focal point. Let's go into it. So one of the main responsibilities is communicating. They communicate information that is received by the Secretariat to the other agencies and stakeholders within a country. They disseminate information. They represent at meetings. They respond to various requests from the Secretariat and other organizations. They collaborate with other stakeholder groups. They have the responsibility for monitoring, and they promote and facilitate national implementation of the convention, which are the three objectives: sustainable use, conservation, and benefit sharing. So we'll go into a little bit more detail of each one of these. So under communications, some of the key activities that they undertake are, so they act as the liaison with the convention. So all information that leaves the secretariat in relation to the convention has to flow through the focal point. In most cases, the secretariat would only respond to correspondence from the focal point or your foreign affairs ministry. Most times, if let's say just another agency, let's say like in Guyana, for example, or Guyana, I use the example, EPA, if a request is made by the Secretariat and let's say the Department of Forestry would submit a response to that, they would not endorse that unless it is supported by the focal point, the EPA. So all communication has to be channeled through the EPA or endorsed by them, whether it's with the convention or its other organs, its organs, its subsidiary bodies, or its technical expert groups or working groups. These things need to be endorsed through the focal point, and there need to be these exchange between the ministry and groups. So information is channeled through them, through the ministries, through the other stakeholder groups on the ground. The focal point is also responsible for the dissemination of that information. So that information which is channeled through them, they are the ones responsible for disseminating it, ensuring that it gets to the right individual. So, for example, a request may come for something that is maybe fisheries related or forest related or agriculture related. That information needs to be shared from your focal point to the other relevant agencies and stakeholders within that party so that that information can either, whatever it is, it could be addressed. They're also responsible for representation at meetings. So the focal point, whether it's the agency or the individual, are the responsible for making nominations to attend meetings or nominate other competent individuals within that party to attend these meetings. So the focal points sometimes don't necessarily have to go to a meeting. For example, if the expertise do not lie within their particular ministry or agency, they can nominate experts within their country to attend these meetings to best, I guess, represent the interests of that party at that particular meeting. So there are many thematic areas within the convention that requests are made for nominations to attend particular meetings or workshops on particular thematic areas. For example, there could be some on marine and coastal biodiversity, there could be on restoration, on protected areas, it could be on synthetic biology, resource mobilization. So there are a number of thematic areas and agenda items that they would have either workshops or meetings to ensure that they can make some progress between the COPs, the intersessional periods, so that they could help advance a particular decision on something at a COP. They're also responsible for responding to various requests. So, as I mentioned, the Secretariat, based on the decisions that were adopted at the COP, would be given mandates to maybe do something, and it may involve the participation of member states to do certain things or to contribute to a particular report. So requests are being made by the Secretariat through the focal point, and they need to respond to these requests. So they're responsible for coordinating these responses to requests from the Secretariat. And like I mentioned, they may not have the expertise to do it, but they are responsible for coordinating and ensure that whatever is requested, if the party so desires to or to take any action, they the focal point would have to be responsible for that coordination. So, and these requests include nomination of delegates to meetings, requests to peer review reports and documents. Many of the reports that are produced are shared, or a request is made by parties to peer review them, as well as documents that are produced by the Secretariat. A request comes out sometimes for a peer review by member states, so that they can get that kind of buy-in and that kind of scrutiny that whatever is finally agreed has been endorsed by as many states as possible. So experts to be on expert groups or working groups. Sometimes these come as a request from the COP to establish an expert group to address a particular issue. So nominations has to be made, and parties are asked, a request is made by a party to submit nominations based on the technical expertise or persons within your country experience to sit on these expert groups to ensure that whatever request was made at the COP can be fulfilled. So a lot of the times you see requests coming for nominations for expert groups or to sit on committees or to be part of a technical working group. They also have the role of collaborating with other stakeholder groups, and they ideally supposed to lead the coordination for collaboration within the stakeholder group. So within country, when you're preparing for, let's say, negotiation, or you're preparing to attend a meeting, ideally you should consult as many of your stakeholders as possible to ensure that all their priorities are either understood so you can represent them at these meetings, whether it be intersessional or at the conference of parties every 2 years, or at intersessional in between conference of party COP meetings. So you have to ensure that you have that they're supposed to lead that collaboration, to get them together, to get them to review, to get national red lines as to what they would accept, what they wouldn't accept. And these groups include youth, the IPLCs, indigenous people and local communities. So this is, I think, a lot of emphasis is placed on the views and the input of indigenous people and local communities. A new subsidiary body was created at COP16 to address the issues of indigenous people and local communities. So that was a major milestone. So this is that's a very important stakeholder group that should not be overlooked when in your coordination activities. Another important group is women, academia. They're also responsible for monitoring again, to coordinate monitor at the party level to respond to the requests from the Secretariat and other stakeholders. So at times we have to submit national reports that needs to be coordinated through the focal points, and to submit a report, you must have some monitoring plan or mechanism to ensure that you can collect data so you can accurately report your activities that you have been doing to implement the three objectives of the convention. And under this one, final one is to promote and facilitate national implementation of the convention. Again, the focal point is supposed to lead national activities in achieving the three objections, which are sustainable use, conservation, and benefit sharing. And when I say lead, promote, lead, facilitate, they may not be doing it hands-on, but they need to create that enabling environment. They need to facilitate, they need to build these collaborations, these networks, so that they are the ones, because everything is channeled through them, they need to build these networks and partnerships within countries so that they can fulfill or try to fulfill as much of the objectives of the convention as possible. So in regional and international negotiations, each party, so in the CBD, although we negotiate as groups, Latin America and the Caribbean, you have Africa, you have Asia Pacific, you have Europe, Western Europe, and you have Central and Eastern Europe. So there are 5 major groups. But although we negotiate as groups, each country also has their own national priorities that they would like to see expressed in the decisions that are adopted at the COP. So yes, we negotiate as groups where we have major objectives that we want to achieve as a group, but in most cases, countries have their own national priorities that they come and they have the red lines that there are things that they will not accept, and they have to try the best to ensure that they live with the best compromise that possible. So that's why it is important for to have strong national consultations that would help your negotiators to solidify their positions in these negotiations. And these consultations are essential for ensuring that you engage at the widest possible cross section of your society so that they can give you their priorities so you can come up with something at the national level. So how do these inform these negotiations? So they provide essential input from national agencies and experts. In many cases, a lot of joint negotiators are not experts in all of the fields. A lot of the times, in the developed context, a lot of them are foreign affairs and legal persons who depend heavily on the input from these national agencies and experts to give them the data and information that they would need to defend their positions in these negotiations. The same applies with the Caribbean. Most of our negotiators are not experts in all fields. So we still depend heavily on the experts within our national agencies and our local experts to provide us with that information and the context that we would need to ensure that we can defend our positions at these negotiations. These countries, they also help with the validation of regional and international reports. In many cases in the region, a lot of the times we suffer from data deficiencies, and a lot of global data is used in reporting, and sometimes these global data sets are not, as I would say, truly reflective of our actual circumstances on the ground. So it's good to be able to have this consultation so that you could know and you could spot that there are some discrepancies in these national reports, so you can highlight that at this global or regional negotiations, say that no, yes, you so sometimes you can say that you basing your argument on a premise that this is the case, but actually our data, local data shows X and Y, so this cannot stand. So it's always good to have these consultations to validate what is said at the regional and international level to ensure that it aligns with your national circumstance, or else you might be disadvantaged. These also help with the alignment of the national biodiversity strategy and action plans with the newest global framework, the Montreal Global Framework. The NDSAP is the major tool that is used by countries for implementation of the three objectives of the convention. It's your NBSAP. It's a plan that you design to try to achieve the three goals. In 2022 at COP15, a new global framework was adopted, the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, with four goals, 23 targets, and all NBSAPs had to be aligned to these new goals and targets to ensure that we reach our 2030 target of trying to achieve these 30 targets by 2030, and the four goals by 2050. So it's important these consultations to have them as well. And these will, for example, during that negotiation process, it was very critical to ensure that what our national circumstance was reflected in these global targets, because in many instances what some of these targets are asking for at a national level, for in particular like in least developed countries and SIDS, some of the things that they were asking for could never be achieved within the time period or even ever by SIDS because of our particular circumstances and challenges that we face. So we have to ensure that at the national level, we had consensus at the national level that these were our red lines, and at a regional level as well, we met as Caribbean states multiple times to ensure that our circumstances were reflected in these new goals and targets so that we could have reported and contributed to achieving these goals and targets by 2030. So that is very critical at the national level to ensure that these consultations feed into these global frameworks, that whatever is being decided, it's something that you can achieve and it doesn't put you at a disadvantage from the start because you already could never achieve it if you never discuss it at a national level. Um, it helps with the whole of society approach. National consultations at the global level is the buzzword is whole of society. They want as much of the society as is involved. Government, private sector, public sector, civil society, women, youth, indigenous people, local communities. They what in this new framework, there's a big emphasis on a whole of society approach and getting as much input from all of these groupings, because it has been realized that to achieve the goals and targets, or just to halt and reverse the biodiversity loss, it could never be done just with a limited number of stakeholders. Everyone has to play a part. So these at your national consultations, you also need to ensure that you have that diversity among your participants in these consultations. You reach as many persons as possible and get all of their perspectives and input. So these consultations, they also ensure that local knowledge and priorities are reflected in international agreements. I mentioned that earlier. This is always your major objective, is to ensure that your national priorities are reflected in these international agreements and decisions that are taken. Otherwise, you are at a disadvantage. And because you are party to the convention, everything that is adopted is binding. And because you are a party, you are bound by all of these decisions, whether or not they you had any input in making these decisions. So on that note, I will pause and ask if anyone has any questions. You can pose a question if you have one now on these two, well, it's three topics that I have dealt a bit on. So if anyone has any questions, you can type it in the chat now, or we move on. So we move on to the entry points for youth in national biodiversity processes. Now, I can tell you from experience that I have been in a lot of forums where youth participation has been very tokenized. It was just inviting youth to tick a box that we invited youth and that was it. But beyond that, there was no further engagement with youth in any other development of, let's say, policy, or in a lot of projects, you just invite them to tick your box that yes, you had youth participation because you have some reports right. And it happens a lot where youth participation is tokenized, but there are entry points for youth engagement in this national process. So we'll go through a few of them and see. So a key one is having active national youth networks or organizations. If you have these active organizations and networks, then it's very hard to ignore you because we know you there, and we live on islands, not very large. The circles are small. So you find out, these organizations find out about things and they ask questions and they ask to be invited to things. So if you have these strong organizations, then it's highly unlikely that you are left out. And if you have strong organizations, you have a stronger voice, and it's harder to ignore you and tokenize you. That's something that I strongly believe. Um, Another entry point for youth is by volunteering. Volunteerism is something that I think has been not as strong as it used to be in the past. I think there's a resurgence now, but there was one point where you didn't find that many youth volunteers in a lot of activities, especially biodiversity related. I know there's a lot of volunteerism in the climate space, but I haven't seen a lot of it within the biodiversity space. But that's a very good opportunity to get involved in these national processes. Um, I can tell you, we always need persons to help. There's always too much to do, and I don't think anyone would turn down a volunteer that is willing to assist. So volunteering is a very good way of getting involved in a lot of the national process, and you get to learn a lot. You get that experience. It may not be paid experience, but that's something that you can put on your CV to show that you have worked in a lot of spaces, and you learn a lot because you interact with a lot of people. The biodiversity space is a very multidisciplinary working environment, so you interact with a lot of different disciplines and you pick up a lot in a very short space of time. So another one is getting involved in local biodiversity initiatives. Sometimes there are initiatives ongoing in country. It may not be specifically youth oriented, but there are times when there are initiatives, and if you can't get involved, I think that's an entry point because there are not many people within the space. We tend to remember people. So when things come up, we remember, we reach out, we call. So that's one way to enter into that process. And another key one is getting to know your national focal points, getting to know these agencies, getting to know people within these agencies to understand how they operate, how they do things, so you have a better understanding of what they may be requiring, so that I think can put you on advantage of in terms of getting the attention or interacting with them better. So it's always good to know who these focal agencies are. If it's an individual focal point, knowing who that person is. If it's an agency, knowing what that agency is, how they operate. Another entry point is the inclusion of youth representation on national biodiversity committees. Um, in many instances, a youth representative should be on a national biodiversity committee because the interest of youth has to be represented. So that's a very good entry point as well. If your country has a national biodiversity committee and they have youth representation, that's a very good entry point. In most instances, these positions are time bound, so sometimes a 2 year term or a 3 year term. So person rotate, so that's an opportunity to go in there, get that experience. It helps with your networking. You pick up a lot of knowledge and skills on these committees. Another one is youth, being a youth observer or advisor on the seat within an environmental ministry. If you are lucky enough to be in a ministry that deals with environment or an agency that deals with environment, be whether it may not be the focal point agency, but an agency, it is always good to try to get involved with on these different committees that these agencies have or ministries. Try to get a seat on them, even if it's just as an observer or an alternate, just to gain the experience, to get an understanding of how things work, what is done. I think that's something that is important. Um, Internship and mentorship opportunities within environmental organizations. I'm not sure how many countries do it, but in St. Lucia, there is an internship program, I think, that the Ministry of Education offers, where they place students within different ministries for summers. And I think that's a good entry point for young persons. So if you're interested in environment, that's a good entry point where you could be in a ministry for a month or two to get a greater understanding of how it functions, what are some of the challenges of dealing with some of these environmental issues, especially biodiversity, what are some of the challenges, and how you could, and it to give you a better understanding of framing some of these challenges and thinking of solutions or workarounds to some of them. Even mentorships as well. There are some mentorship programs within some countries where you have persons mentoring, some of them being persons in the environmental space. Another entry point is youth involvement in citizen science platforms. There are many citizen science platforms, some national, some regional, some international, where youth can actually go collect data, post some of this data. You have a lot of, well, yeah, so you could collect data and there are platforms where that can be shared. So you get a feel of the actual on the ground data collection. You could work with some groups to see how it is collected, how it analyzed. So this citizen science, and it also contributes to developing your national data sets, your personal skills, as well as in data collection, data analysis, in monitoring. So that's an entry point as well. Participation in regional projects supported by organizations listed as OECS, CARICOM. That's another entry point where youth participation in projects, if there are projects with some aspects of youth participation and they can be funded, that is a good opportunity to get into the spaces at the national level and you get a better understanding of the processes. Another entry point is youth-led biodiversity awareness campaigns. Excuse me. Youth-led biodiversity awareness campaigns. That's something that if you have very strong advocacy skills and you have a platform where you can showcase that, that's another entry point. You put yourself out there, you get known, so people know you, they see you around. So when things are happening, they know that these individuals or these groups are groups that we can interact with to assist us in getting stuff done. Participation in National Biodiversity Days and environmental observations. Again, many times on these celebratory days, the International Biodiversity being one of them, which is on Friday. There are normally a lot of national activities that are being planned. You can get involved in that, or as a youth, you can plan your own activities in commemoration of these days and other environmental days like World Forest Day, World Water Day, World Wildlife Day in February and March, Wetlands Day in February. Inclusion of youth components in biodiversity project proposals. I think that's something that at an institutional level needs to be done more to ensure that when developing projects, we develop components with a heavy, well, not heavy, but with some consideration for youth. In doing that, you ensure that you engage these young persons and you bring them onto these projects where now they can contribute, they can feel a sense of ownership, and youth are the stewards of the resource anyway. As generations move, the younger ones are the ones who are going to be responsible for managing and sustainably using these resources. So it would be good to build into projects components that target the youth specifically, to engage them, build the capacities, build the knowledge to ensure that they can take up the stewardship of the resources after we are gone. Youth access to micro grants for conservation projects. I think that's something that's important. A big challenge is that the youth may not be in a position to finance a lot of activities that they may want to do. They may have great ideas, but a serious challenge often is the financing of it. So it would be good if that we have facilities that grant access to micro grants for conservation projects. I think in many islands you have these conservation trusts. I think that's one window where you have some of these grant mechanisms, but I think more are needed to ensure that we can target much more young persons. and your participation in project steering committees. It's always good to have fresh perspectives. And if we're looking at the whole of society approach to dealing with conservation, then on project steering committees, it will always be good to have a youth representative to ensure that the interests are, are represented in these projects. So the last component of my presentation is pathways towards mentorship for with regional negotiators. Now we are a crop of in the region. We have a very small pool of negotiators, and a lot of us are either aging out or going in different directions that may pull us away from national negotiations. So we need to have some kind of plan or some pathways to ensure that we have younger persons who can carry the mantle after we are gone. So I try to think of it and put it in three broad categories of how you could three pathways I looked at. One was exposure, second one was capacity building, and the third one is leadership transition. So let's look at the exposure. So, under exposure, one of the major things is shadowing of national delegations. Um, what I would love to see is every delegation has at least one youth representative at every single meeting that they go to. A challenge that we have within the region is funding for these delegations. A lot of these meetings are they tend to be very costly, and a lot of our funding comes directly from the secretariat, from the voluntary fund that developing countries put money into to sponsor delegations from developing countries. But I would really love to see that at a national level, we try to ensure that we get more or bigger delegations. I don't know how yet, but we need to come with innovative ways to ensure that we have at least one youth representative on that delegation, a young person who can be part of the team, be part of the negotiating team, and 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 learn about the process and gradually build themselves to take over the responsibility of negotiations over time. Another one is internship placement with regional institutions. I think by placing young persons within a lot of these regional or even national institutions in these in internship programs, you you get to learn a lot about the you get to learn a lot about how things are done within these these organizations and at the multilateral level, how are decisions made? What are the implications of these decisions on your country? So if you know these things, I think it you have a better understanding and sense of wanting to do it differently to ensure that these decisions do not disenfranchise your country. Um, we so you also have exposure like from community to policy exposure. In this one, we a lot of times you have a lot of young persons who do a lot of stuff at community level, but that's where it stops. They never get pulled into the other aspect of conservation, which is looking at things at a more policy level and I think that's where we need to ensure that we have these linkages between, well, in country where you have young people on committees or in on project steering committees on national on committees, so that you have young persons within ministries, either as an observer or as you have them there as part of the process where they learn and they contribute towards these processes, because a lot of the times these are the persons who are going to succeed the older ones, and the earlier you learn it, the better. I think you have a better understanding, you know what to do, how to do. So it's an easier transition rather than coming in young after green and they just drop you in a position where you have to just sink or swim. Um, you have intergovernmental dialogue platforms. I think there are a few of these that young persons can sign up to. I think these are very helpful. In terms of exposure as well, some of the areas of exposure that by that being by either shadowing or being placed somewhere, some of the areas of exposure that things that you get exposed to are diplomatic processes, policy coordination, the actual treaty implementations. You have the regional cooperation mechanism, intergovernmental platforms. You have, and in some of the spaces, you also get to meet other negotiators, either from your country, your region, or from other regions. Um, and you also get to network. It's a very good opportunity as well to build your networks. And one of the best ways to do that is through exposure. The second pathway forward was capacity building. And so under capacity, one of the key things is regional negotiation training programs. I think this is something that is very important, where you have some training programs that are continuous, not just a one-off thing, but it's a continuous program where at least maybe 2 or 3 times a year you could run these programs where you have these negotiation training programs, and that's an opportunity where these new negotiators can meet up with existing or past negotiators and get some of that mentorship that they can use to help develop them and propel them to become the negotiators of the future. And really biodiversity sphere. So it's something, and like I mentioned, it's a very small group that we have, and we really need to expand it. And as a component of that program, you could have you could have workshops, you could have mock negotiation sessions, you could have negotiation strategy sessions. There are a lot that you can ways that you could develop it. So mock negotiation and diplomacy exercises where you go through these negotiation processes. You have these simulations and keep it as real as possible, so you get a true sense of what it's like to be in a negotiation, where if you leave, a decision can be made that you it may be very difficult for you now to try to reverse it because of maybe that 5 minutes that you left to go somewhere else, or you did something. Um, you can have the digital mentorship networks. For example, now you have a lot of options where you can have digital mentorship. You can have Zoom, there's Teams, there's Google Meets, there's other social media platforms where you can have one-on-one sessions. You can be assigned to a particular negotiator, and that person could mentor you through a digital means. If that person is not within your country, then you can do that on some digital format. You can also have South exchanges programs as SIDS. We have similar circumstances, similar challenges. So these programs could be among the SIDS, with the African SIDS, the Pacific SIDS, or even with negotiators from developed countries where with no, it's also so in Latin America as well, Africa, you have these exchanges where you can be mentored by an experienced negotiator from another region. I mean, these networks already exist within the Caribbean. We have some of these networks already established, so it's just to develop these programs and implement some of these things. And the last pathway I thought of was leadership transition. And I think this is the juncture that we're at now, where we need to have a plan on how we transition from this present crop of negotiators to those for the future. And I think one way that can happen is participation in technical working groups and advisory committees. So we need to have young persons involved in these groups and on these committees, so that they can get some of that mentorship from existing members in these committees and and groups. Because once these persons leave, it's very difficult to get a lot of that knowledge. So sometimes they leave country, they leave the region, they go other places. So a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of just um, institutional knowledge, just a lot of know-how is just lost because persons move. So we need young people to be in these spaces, youth to be in these spaces, so that they can get some of that knowledge. Another one is youth representation within official delegations. One thing I would like to see, and I would say to Tyrell, I know one aspect of the course is to get a few members of the course in the end to be potential representatives or to go to COP to get the COP experience, right? What I would love to see is that if we can get them to go, if we can get them on the country delegations, in that way, they would get to be in spaces where a non-party would not be able to be. So they can be in all the friends of the chairs in the group that are exclusive for parties, and there in these spaces is where you really get the real negotiation experience, where you in a very small group, it coming on to the end and a decision needs to be made. It would be good if a lot of our youth can be on the national delegations if they get to go to COP. Um, that would be one thing I'd like to see, that they on the national delegation. So, and in that way as well, they get to see the process. They get to be in all the preparatory meetings for the Caribbean meetings. They can sit in the GRULAC meetings, the preparatory meetings. So you get a feel of how it's done. You understand why at times there would be some urgency or some pushback by a particular region to do a particular thing. So that would be something I'd love to see if possible. And we need to develop some long-term mentor-mentee relationships. I think that would help, that for to have a proper transition, you need to have these relationships. It can't just be where we come to a training for a week, and after this week, your mentor just disappear for like maybe 5, 6 months, and the next time you hear from them is when they have another training. We need to foster these relationships where you have regular conversations where these persons could mentor you on just a lot they on so they can help you with policy drafting, with they give you technical advice, national position development. Um, so they guide you on a lot of these things that you might want. So they can also help you with career planning. You have these discussions on planning for your career, on diplomatic leadership development, on professional networking. They could so that's in this relationship. That's some of the benefits of having a long-term relationship. You reach out international engagement opportunities. Um, so these are some of the things that I think if you're transitioning, that you would need to put in place to ensure that you have that taking over of the mantle from one set of negotiators to the next. And finally, I think you have some alumni and emerging negotiation networks. So persons who have gone through the program of um, these negotiation trainings and have moved on to becoming negotiators now can be mentors to incoming persons. So you always have that cycle of mentee mentor through that program. As you graduate, you become an alumni, and you give back, ensuring that you always have a steady flow of new negotiators for the region. And I think that's the end of my presentation. This is my contact information, my name, email address, telephone number. So if you need any additional information, I'm available. Yeah. Now I open the floor to questions. And I will stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, everyone. So thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Edmond. In the interest of time, we will spare a few minutes for questions. So you all are able, sorry, you could feel free to raise your hand and we'll select a couple people to ask questions. Just please be mindful of the length of time. So I'm saying Kinetic, I think I pronounced your name wrong, so I wouldn't try that. But let me unmute you. Yes, you could feel free to ask your question.
I see that there's a question in the chat from I don't know how to pronounce your name, but the question is, when it comes to biodiversity conservation in St. Lucia, what are the main challenges? So let me just take down quickly. So some of the main challenges for conservation in St. Lucia, and I wouldn't say St. Lucia, I would say throughout the region, is the sustainable financing for conservation. It's a very costly undertaking, and a lot of the things that needs to be done, the financing is not readily available. A lot of our financing comes from donor assistance, and with the geopolitical climate right now, donor funding has been cut significantly. So we are going to be facing a challenge where what we need to do, we don't have the money to do it. At the national level, our governments understand the need to do certain things, but it's a balancing act that governments play. So they prioritize what they believe is best for the national development. And most times, what takes priority is health, education, agriculture, economic development. So these are some of the challenges I think that all of us face throughout the region. Is that we have competing interests for financing, and financing is a critical challenge. Another challenge you have is human capacity. A lot of the fields that we need experts in, we don't have some of them, and that's another challenge that we face. But I'll leave it there.
All right, great. I just allowed someone to be unmuted. I'm not sure we are not hearing you. I don't want to mispronounce your name. I believe it's Kiniski, but we're not hearing you. I see you're unmuted. Okay, so in time being, we'll move on to Nia.
Can you hear me?
Okay,
Hello?
who is speaking? Is this? Yes, we can hear you now.
This is Nia. I just wanted to ask a quick question. What do you think is the biggest barrier that is preventing young people from entering the environmental sector right now?
Biggest barrier for getting them into the sector. I think a major barrier is, I think, the structure of our systems. We function in some really archaic systems that are very rigid with very little flexibility. And I think something needs to be done to really shake it up so that we can reprioritize and rethink how we do things. We, for example, a lot of instances. Let's take the public sector for say. They have these archaic rules where persons are promoted based on seniority in a position. You may have young persons with the technical skills and capacities to do things, but because of the archaic systems, you could only be promoted if you're there for a certain amount of time. And even to get some position, they would ask you for like 10 years of experience, which a young person would never have. So I think the structure that we work within needs to change. I think that is a major barrier. Is the systems that exist that exclude a lot of young people from things, and I think that needs to change.
Mr. Edmond, do you mind just putting on your video, please? Although we just have a few more minutes left, so I'm seeing Stefan and then Jose. So Stefan. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Yes, thank you, Mr. Edmond, for a great presentation. I have two very important questions. One is if there's an example that you can walk us through of two countries having conflicting interests and how that negotiation went. And the second question, is there any place that you can point us to find statistics on youth participation? For example, we would like to know what percentage of youths was involved in the forming of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, because it's an important tool to have when we get into a room and say we want to be part of a negotiation.
Okay, so let me take the second one first. That may be difficult to find. I don't think there is a number per se. But what I can tell you is during the negotiations, you had a very strong youth presence. The GYBN, Global Biodiversity Youth Network, were at every open working ended group for that thing, for the negotiations of that. They were present at every meeting, and they are present at every SAPSTA, every SBI, every COP. So, and they have the input. But the way the system is designed is that the CBD is a country-led process, is a party-led process. So parties would only So youth speak at the discretion of parties. So when the youth makes a statement or makes an intervention, it has to be supported by parties for it to be included in the final decision. So the more parties that support it, the stronger and louder it is. So the more it would be within that particular decision. But I can tell you, their participation, you've had a very heavy input into that into that framework, because there is actually a target on women and youth, and there in section C there's a heavy focus on youth, women, whole of society approach in implementing these goals and targets. So for your first question now, this one is a little more difficult. I may take longer to explain. So let me give you a short version. So there is an agenda item on digital sequence information, and there was a meeting in Switzerland where we were trying to get a decision or to move forward on trying to find some way to get countries who use digital sequence information to pay for it. And eventually at COP16, the Cali Fund was developed, which is a mechanism for getting benefits from DSI. But at that one meeting, Japan was adamant that DSI is not a genetic resource. It has nothing to do with genetic resources. So it cannot be, they cannot accept it. And it came at a point where almost everyone in the room was agreeing that yes, DSI, because it is a derivative of a genetic resource, it can be considered, but it needs further negotiations. But Japan just came in at the last minute and said, no, we do not recognize it as anything, so it just has to go. And it took some time. What happened was what normally happens is that in a situation like that, these parties would meet on the side. They would go on the side and try to reach some kind of compromise, and that's what happened. So what Japan agreed was that yes, that they can agree that they would consider it or potentially consider it as a resource, but for now they just have to just leave it in brackets so that nothing can be agreed yet until they do their further consultations and move forward. But in most cases, when there's an issue like that where two parties are not agreeing, they normally tell them to go on a side and or meet at lunch and discuss it further and come back with a compromise or a solution that can advance the negotiations.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Edmond. So in the interest of time, we'll take one more question from Jose, and then Tisha would like to say something, and then we will close off the session. So Jose.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Thank you for the presentation. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I had the opportunity to work, let's say, on the sideways of youth policy and environmental policy, but I've never been part of the room. So my question would be, that goes for all of us. What would be the main three takeaways if we were to be selected that we should really try to harper in if we are in the room as youth ambassadors and leaders in the room of negotiations, because it would be our first time. So like, what are the three basic things that we always need to keep in mind if we were to be selected? Thank you very much.
Okay, so three main things. One is that first thing that you always have to keep in mind is that you have to enter the negotiations in good faith. I think that is the premise of all the negotiations. You have to go in good faith. that you have to go in there knowing that we in here to try to reach a decision, not coming in and saying that, you know what, I don't care. I have never. We're not making any progress today. You have to go in with the good faith that we want to leave here with something that is beneficial to all of us. I think that's the first thing that you have to keep in mind, that you have to be operating in good faith. The second one is that I think as a negotiator, you really need to be what are they looking for? So you need to be, yes, you may have your red lines, but again, you need to be objective and look at this thing as something that is for the greater good. Like, you may not get everything that you want, but you have to have that compromise that you're willing to accept. You have to have some notion of what your compromise might be going in there, because if you have no notion of a compromise, you don't even know where you want to stop or what you might want to, so you have to have some ideas. Okay, we have our red lines, but this is what the minimum we can accept is X or Y. So you need to have that there as well. And I think, and something else that you need to have as a small delegation at the back of your mind, you need to be fearless, because sometimes it's an intimidation tactic and a bullying tactic that the bigger delegations use. So you need to be fearless. If you need to be able to stand your ground, and yeah, so you have to be fearless in these negotiations, or else you will be trampled. So you need to be able to stand your ground, do it, but do it in a respectful manner, in a diplomatic manner, but make your position known and make them know that yes, we may be a small delegation, but we are here as equals to you, and I am your equal. I'm not less than you because I have one person and you have 50. We are all equals in the negotiations. And that's something that you always have to remember, that you are an equal to anybody in the room. You have as much right and power as anybody in the room, because all of us are parties to the same convention and all of us have the same privileges. So I think these are three things when you're going into a room that you always have to bear in mind. And I think that will keep you grounded in your negotiations.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Because as we have already established, you're very experienced in this space. So we'll like to call on one of our very, consistent supporters at Caribbean. I'd like to call Ms. Tisha Batiste from the CARICOM Secretariat, who would like to give a few comments before we close off the session.
Thank you, Tyrell, for giving me this opportunity. I won't take much time. Just want to thank and to acknowledge the really excellent presentation Jeremiah did. One thing I will add to the three that Jeremiah just mentioned that's very important, he probably missed, is being prepared. Reading, doing your research, understanding the agenda, knowing your country's position. These are important things you need to go in addition to the three Jeremiah said. So I'll say that. And I wanted to go back to another comment in terms of what someone was asking about, how can young people get involved. I think as young people, and y'all are the right set of people to become advocates for yourselves. Knowing, I think Jeremiah mentioned it, knowing who your national focal points are and making yourself known, whether it is as an individual or through an organization, that you are willing to volunteer your time and efforts is important. Making them know, because I know, for example, in St. Lucia, number of activities happen in terms of doing public awareness engagement activities. They go into schools, and I'm certain they would welcome opportunities for young people to join them, to make presentations at the different school events or different activities they're having. Say, for example, a cleanup campaign, whether it be through an organization like GYBN Caribbean's the youth environment programs. There are CYN chapters in all of the countries as well. But I think that as young people, what needs to happen is that you need to advocate and present yourself to your national focal points and say you are, whether it be writing formally or just introducing yourselves. I am so and so. I did this excellent diplomacy course, and I'm interested in volunteering my time and any opportunity where I can contribute to national development in terms of environment, biodiversity, climate change. It's a step in the right direction, and I encourage you as young people to take that bold step and be advocates for yourself, or whether it is to join an organization such as GYBN Caribbean or CYN or any other environmental entity within your country. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing those encouraging words, Tisha. And with that, we'll close off the session. So we'd like to extend a special thank you to Mr. Edmund, who took the time this afternoon to give that very excellent and in-depth presentation. And also Tisha for joining us and sharing her encouraging words. I think it reinforces, the messages that we have been trying to get across to participants in terms of the seriousness of the course and why we want to maintain a high standard. So a recording of the session will be available and shared as always in the coming days. And if you all have any additional questions, Mr. Edmund would have shared his email address. I saw someone sent it in the group as well, so you could feel free to reach out to him. And of course, we hope that everybody continue to have a great day. So do enjoy the rest of your day and keep well. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. It was my pleasure.
Good night.